Everyone, it's Argonaut here from the right way, and I'm probably sure you will have heard about the terrible crisis that is going on in Sri Lanka with almost their whole economy collapsing and food supplies collapsing and so on, and they've got no money to buy things from overseas. Absolutely terrible for the people living there. So I came across this article just recently. It was written on July the 12th, so it's been a while, but it's got some very interesting remarks about why Sri Lanka got into this particular situation. And part of the reason is get woke, go broke. All right, so let's have a look at what's going on here. So Sri Lanka just fell. What do we have to do with it? The anti-growth environmental movement deserves much of the blame. That's interesting. So let's have a look. So this is from Michael Schellenberger, best-selling author of Apocalypse Never in San Francisco, Time Magazine, Green Book Award winner. So it sounds like he's a pretty good writer. So he's on Substack, and there's a this article is free to read, so that's good. So let's have a look. So this is just after the riots and everything that happened in Sri Lanka. So Sri Lanka has fallen. On Saturday, thousands of protesters stormed the presidential palace, while the angry and aggrieved swam in the president's pool and had a cookout on his lawn, lounged on his bed and set fire to his residence. The president was spirited away to a naval ship off the Sri Lankan coast. What an absolute coward. He couldn't even face up to the people that he ruined. What an absolute coward that guy was. The proximate reason for the chaos is the nation is bankrupt, suffering its worst financial crisis in decades. Millions are struggling to buy food, medicine, and fuel. Now, for those of us that living in countries, I'm in New Zealand, living in countries where things might be bad, but at least we're still able to buy food and medicine and get fuel for our vehicles and so on, right? Imagine what these millions of people in Sri Lanka are having to go through. I just cannot imagine how life must be like over there. Between June 2021 and June 2022, food prices rose by 80%. Holy shit. Last month, annual inflation hit nearly 55%. So down here in New Zealand, our inflation rate is about 7.9%, and the government's in la la land going, oh, there's nothing wrong with that. We're better than some of the other countries in the OECD and so on. But it doesn't matter. We don't need to compare ourselves to other countries. We just need to look at what it's going to do to our country. Imagine hitting 55%. That's ridiculous. Since the start of the pandemic, 500,000 people have fallen into poverty. Oh, man. If you've never paid attention to the island country just off India's southeastern coast, you might think that this is how it goes in developing nations. But the truth is that Sri Lanka had been gradually rebuilding itself after decades of civil war and authoritarianism. Then this happened. We in the West had a lot to do with it. So yeah, I mean, Sri Lanka has had civil war for many years. It's been ruled by authoritarian leaders who basically um, rig things that they get revoted every time, and they had basically kind of like a royal family, but they're not royalty, but like a royal family who basically people just voted for because of the family that they belong to. But even then, it was actually doing quite well. It was pulling itself out of a developing country status and getting a bigger middle class going. Still had a lot of poor people, obviously, just like India has a lot of poor people, but it has a huge middle class now. So the underlying reason for the fall in Sri Lanka is that its leaders, starting with the former president Maithripala Sirisena and continuing with his successor, the recently deposed Gotabaya Rajapaksa, fell under the spell of Western green elites peddling organic agriculture and ESG, which refers to investments made following supposedly higher environmental, social, and governance criteria. Sri Lanka has a near perfect ESG score of 98, higher than Sweden 96 and the United States 51. Well, there you go, right? You fall under the spell of these left-wing idiots who espouse all these environmental things but never think about the consequences of what happens. You can't just make huge changes to the way things are done to overcome this. You've got to make incremental changes so that it doesn't affect your population. What does having such a high ESG score mean? In short, it meant that Sri Lanka's 2 million farmers were forced to stop using fertilizers and pesticides, laying waste to its critical agricultural sector. Never mind that Tesla has been booted from the ESG S&P index while ExxonMobil is in the top 10. None of it makes any sense. That is just ridiculous. Why would they boot Tesla out? Because it's making electric cars. Why are they keeping ExxonMobil in? Because it's a friggin' oil company, right? So they were forced to stop fertilizer and pesticides because of these stupid green elite people wanting to exert their influence and had the ear of the president or prime minister or whatever the person was. To be sure, there were other factors behind Sri Lanka's fall. COVID lockdowns and a 2019 bombing hurt tourism, an industry that usually generates between 3 billion and 5 billion a year. Sri Lanka racked up huge foreign debt, with China lending the country billions of dollars as part of its Belt and Road Initiative. Transportation costs have rocketed 128% since May due to rising oil prices, and overall trends have not helped. Since 2012, growth has been declining. But the biggest problem was Sri Lanka's chemical fertilizer ban, which passed last year, was central in the country's effort to comply with ESG. The numbers are shocking. So what we can probably infer is that they banned fertilizer and pesticides, which means they're not going to have enough crops, right? They're going to have crop failures, and so they can't feed their own people. I'm sure that's what's going to happen, so let's read in the next part. 1/3 of Sri Lanka's farmlands were dormant in 2021 due to the fertilizer ban. So they were dormant, they weren't even being used. Shit. 1/3, 33%. Over 90% of Sri Lanka's farmers had used chemical fertilizers before they were banned. After they were banned, an astonishing 85% experienced crop losses. 85% of them experienced crop losses. Rice production fell 20% and prices skyrocketed 50% in just 6 months. Of course, when supply goes down and demand is still there, the price goes up. Sri Lanka had to import $450 million worth of rice despite having been self-sufficient just months earlier. Oh my god, that is just terrible. They went from being self-sufficient to having to import $450 million worth of rice. The price of carrots and tomatoes rose fivefold. All this had a dramatic impact on the more than 15 million people of the country's 22 million people who are directly or indirectly dependent on farming. You can bet your bottom dollar that none of this affected the socialist elites that are running government and the elite of the industry and so on. It won't affect those people because they'll just pay it, right? It affects all the poor people who they sucker to vote for them and so on. Things were worse for smaller farmers in the Rajanganaya region, where the majority of farmers operate 2.5 acre lots. Families reported 50% to 60% reductions in their harvest. Wow, 50% or 60% less in their harvest. Before the ban, this was one of the biggest markets in the country with tons and tons of rice and vegetables. But after the ban, it became almost zero. If you talk to the rice mills, they don't have any stock because people's harvest dropped so much. The income of this whole community has dropped to an extremely low level. So it makes people poor because they can't sell the stuff because they don't have it. And then the price goes up to buy it to feed people. But the damage to the tea was key to Sri Lanka's ruin. Before 2021, tea production generated 1.3 billion in exports annually. Tea exports pay for 71% of the nation's food imports. The fertilizer ban, starting in April 2021, changed everything. 4 months after the ban took effect, the president, realizing that things were not going according to plan, lifted the ban on the import of chemical fertilizers, and then 2 days later reinstated it. What an absolute moron. What a dickhead. Oh man. No wonder the people rose up and threw him out. The results have been devastating, with what widely predicted by tea farmers, with exports crashing 18%, reaching their lowest level in more than 2 decades. We don't have enough chemical fertilizers, Rajapaksa admitted in December 2021, because we didn't import them. There is a shortage. Because you banned it, you dickhead. You effing dickhead. In May 2022, Sri Lanka failed to pay 77 million on its foreign debt repayments. That may seem like a small sum in the bigger scheme of things, but the default made it hard for Sri Lanka to borrow money. so it devalued its currency. Inflation rose 30%, and the government ran out of cash. It needed to import fuel, medicines, and food and medicine. That's the problem when you devalue your currency. It's going to cost you more to buy stuff overseas because you can't make it because you friggin' brand all the fertilizer and pesticides. You moron. Well, these people are having fun in the guy's pool. It's about all they can do. That's about the only fun they've ever had for the last year or so. What exactly were Rajapaksa and other Sri Lankan leaders thinking? Why did they engage in such a radical experiment with the most important industry in their country? After World War II, Sri Lanka, like many poor nations, subsidized farmers to transition from biofertilizers like manure to chemical fertilizer in what is known as the Green Revolution. This was popularized by Norman Borlaug, the Nobel Prize-winning agronomist. Rice yields quickly rose, and the nation overcame chronic food shortages and started earning foreign revenue through the export of rubber and tea. As yields rose, young people were able to get jobs in cities, salaries increased, so much so that Sri Lanka became a middle-income nation. But what looked like a dream to most Sri Lankans looked like a nightmare to many environmentalists in the West. Of course, all these left-wing people sipping their Chardonnay, putting out their stuff on Twitter, denouncing the rest of the world while they're happily living in the lap of luxury. In the 1970s, Stanford biologist Paul Ehrlich and other activists raged against the Green Revolution. They claimed that the overpopulation would cause mass death and suffering, and that humankind needed to play triage. In other words, we had to let people die so the rest of us could live. So he wants those minority brown people over there in Sri Lanka to die so you white middle class people can live, right? That's essentially what they wanted. So really good article from Michael Schellenberger. None of this is ever talked about in the mainstream media, right? All you just hear about is Sri Lanka's collapsed. They got rid of the Prime Minister or the President, whoever it was, but they never talk about why this occurred, because it goes against all we hear about in the media about climate change and getting rid of pesticides and fertilizers and ban this and ban that and all that kind of stuff. And if we do all that, we're going to starve everyone. But then that's the whole point, right? That's what this bloody guy said over here. We need to play triage. We need to kill people off so the rest of them can live in the lap of luxury. So really excellent article. I think this guy's hit the nail on the head. They just need to, well, I don't know how they're going to do it, because how are they going to import fertilizer and pesticides? They have no money. So it's going to be a really tough problem. Let's hope that something happens for them. Let me know what you think. Do you agree with the writer of the article that this green ideology has played a major factor in the downfall of Sri Lanka, as well as the other causes that were mentioned? Or if you think differently, I would like to know as well. Love to hear your comments. I'll read your comments, I should say, in the comment section. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you don't like the video, you're welcome to give it a thumbs down. And if you like my content, please subscribe as well. And hopefully I'll catch you in the next video.